Harold sat in his dimly lit living room, the air thick with the dust of memories and the echoes of laughter that had long faded. The room was a museum of his life, filled with faded photographs that chronicled a family he no longer knew. He flipped through an old photo album, each page a portal to a time when his children's smiles lit up the room. There they were, grinning widely at birthday parties, school graduations, and holidays that had once brought them together. Now those faces were mere specters, haunting him with their absence. His fingers traced the outlines of their images, a bittersweet reminder of the love that had slipped through his fingers like sand. How did it come to this? He muttered to himself, the words a quiet confession to the shadows that surrounded him. Loneliness wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, suffocating yet familiar. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a painful reminder of the silence that engulfed him. Harold had spent years in this house, walls echoing with the silence of neglect, a place where time had lost meaning. He snapped the album shut, the sound sharp and final. Rising from the worn-out armchair, he walked to the window, peering out into the darkening street. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a dim glow over the empty sidewalks. A few distant voices floated through the air, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. It was a world that continued to turn, oblivious to his solitude. Just another night, he sighed, retreating back into the shadows of his living room. He poured himself a glass of water, the cool liquid a temporary balm against the loneliness that threatened to consume him. He had settled into a routine of quiet evenings, often accompanied by the soft hum of the television. But this evening felt different. An inexplicable tension hung in the air, a feeling he couldn't shake off. As he prepared for another solitary night, the unexpected sound of a thud disrupted the stillness. Harold's heart quickened, a mix of curiosity and fear bubbling within him. He paused, straining to listen. Was it the wind? A stray animal? The noise came again, this time more pronounced. It was definitely at his door. Hesitant, he moved toward the entrance, each step heavy with trepidation. Who could it be? He wondered aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. He opened the door slowly, the creaking hinges echoing in the quiet night. What he saw took his breath away. There, on his doorstep, lay a small basket, wrapped in a warm blanket. What in the world? Harold gasped, leaning closer. The blanket shifted, and he could make out a tiny face peeking from beneath the fabric. A baby, a precious, helpless baby, with bright eyes that sparkled in the dim light. Where did you come from? He murmured, his heart swelling with an unfamiliar surge of emotion. He looked around, half expecting someone to leap out from the shadows, but the street remained empty and silent. The realization struck him. This child had been left here, abandoned. With trembling hands, Harold scooped up the basket, cradling the baby in his arms. The warmth of the blanket seeped into his skin, igniting a flicker of hope within him. You're all alone, aren't you? He whispered, looking down into the infant's curious gaze. I don't know what to do, but I can't just leave you here. He stepped back inside his house, the door shutting softly behind him. The living room, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt alive with the presence of this tiny being. Harold settled down on the couch, still holding the baby, who cooed softly as if sensing his turmoil. Lily, he said suddenly, the name rolling off his tongue like a prayer. I think I'll call you Lily. The name felt right, a gentle bloom amidst the thorns of his past. But deep down, he knew he had no idea how to care for an infant. His heart raced with anxiety as he contemplated the daunting task ahead. What do I know about raising a child? He thought, a pang of self-doubt piercing through the warmth of the moment. Lily wriggled in his arms, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. Harold felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him, drowning out the voices of his inadequacies. I'll figure this out, he promised, more to himself than to the baby. You deserve someone to love you. I may not have been a good father before, but I'll try my best now. He glanced around the room, taking in the remnants of his life, the dusty shelves lined with books, the faded photographs, and the empty chairs that had once been filled with laughter. This place is a mess, he sighed, but for the first time in years, it felt like home. The presence of Lily transformed the dimness into a warmth he had almost forgotten. As he settled back on the couch, Harold began to rock Lily gently, humming an old tune that had once soothed his children to sleep. Her eyes fluttered and a soft sigh escaped her lips. The sound was a melody, a balm to his aching heart. In that moment, Harold felt a connection, a bond that transcended the loneliness that had engulfed him for so long. "Welcome to your new home, little one," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "We'll take care of each other." The promise hung in the air, a fragile vow that held the weight of his past and the hope of a new beginning. For the first time in years, Harold felt a flicker of purpose ignite within him. As he sat in the dim light, holding Lily close, the shadows of his past began to recede, replaced by the light of possibility. However, questions lingered in the back of his mind. Who had left this baby on his doorstep? What had led her to him? The evening stretched on, and as the stars began to twinkle outside, Harold found himself lost in thought, cradling Lily in his arms. The world outside continued to turn, but inside his heart, a new journey was about to begin, one that would challenge him in ways he never imagined and lead him to confront the deepest secrets of his own life. Harold stood in the kitchen, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains, casting a warm glow over the small space. He was still getting used to the idea of being a caretaker, and the weight of responsibility felt heavier than he had anticipated. The faint smell of baby powder lingered in the air, a reminder of the new life he had unwittingly taken on. With a hesitant sigh, he approached the high chair he had borrowed from a neighbor, a makeshift solution to his new role. "Okay, Lily," he murmured, looking down at the tiny girl who was his world now. She gurgled happily, her small hands reaching out for him as if to say, "I'm ready." He took a deep breath, remembering the instructions he had scoured online just the night before. "Let's try some oatmeal." As he prepared the food, Harold felt a swell of pride mixed with anxiety. He had been a successful businessman once, commanding respect in boardrooms, but now he was fumbling with a bowl and a spoon. He poured the oatmeal into a small dish, adding a splash of milk and a sprinkle of sugar. Not too sweet, he reminded himself, recalling the articles he had read about healthy eating for infants. Sitting down across from her, he carefully scooped a spoonful of the mushy concoction and brought it to Lily's lips. "Here comes the airplane," he said in a playful tone, mimicking the voice of a parent he had heard on some show. Lily's eyes widened with delight, and she giggled, the sound pure and innocent. However, the moment was fleeting. Harold's heart sank as he thought about how unprepared he really was. He had never changed a diaper before, let alone cared for a baby. What if he failed? He looked at Lily, her small face illuminated by the morning light, and felt a pang of love so profound it terrified him. "Just take it one step at a time, old man," he whispered to himself, determination creeping in. He wiped his brow, feeling the pressure of expectations bearing down on him. "You can do this." After several spoonfuls and a few messy moments, which ended with oatmeal on both their faces, Harold experienced a surprising joy. Lily's laughter filled the room, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of happiness. Yet, with each chuckle, shadows of inadequacy loomed over him. What if this was just a temporary distraction from his loneliness? Later that day, Harold ventured into town, Lily bundled securely in a carrier against his chest. The fresh air was invigorating, but as he walked, he felt the eyes of the townsfolk on him. Whispers floated through the air like the leaves caught in the autumn breeze. "Look at him," one woman said, her voice dripping with judgment. "What does he think he's doing? Taking in a baby. He can barely take care of himself." Harold's heart raced as he overheard snippets of conversation. He quickened his pace, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. He could sense their scrutiny, their doubts about his ability to care for Lily. "Hey, Harold!" a familiar voice called out. It was Tom, the local butcher, a friendly face in a sea of judgment. "Is that your granddaughter?" Something like that," Harold replied, forcing a smile. Tom's face softened. "Well, she's a cutie. You're doing a good thing, you know." "Thanks," Harold replied, the warmth of Tom's words easing some of his tension. As he continued down the street, he began to notice other neighbors offering smiles and waves. A sense of connection blossomed within him, a flicker of hope that perhaps he was not as alone as he thought. As he reached the park, he found a bench under a sprawling oak tree, the perfect spot for a little break. He settled down, Lily cooing softly beside him. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with patches of light. Harold watched as children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the crisp air, and he couldn't help but smile at Lily, who seemed entranced by the world around her. "Isn't it beautiful here?" he asked her, though he knew she couldn't understand. "You'll love it, I promise." Just then, a woman approached, her expression curious, yet reserved. "Excuse me," she said, her tone cautious. "Is that baby yours?" "Yes," Harold replied, his chest tightening defensively. "I found her on my doorstep." The woman's eyes widened. "Oh, wow, that's quite a story. Are you okay? I mean, taking care of a baby is a big responsibility." "I'm managing," he said, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "I can take care of her." She nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I didn't mean to pry. Well, I saw you in town and thought maybe you could use some help." "Help?" Harold repeated, skepticism creeping in. "What kind of help?" "I can babysit if you need a break," she offered, her demeanor friendly. "I have a little girl, too, and I'm sure they could play together." Harold considered her offer, his mind racing. The thought of accepting help felt foreign, almost shameful. "I appreciate it, but I'm fine," he replied, a touch more curt than intended. "All right," she said, holding her hands up in surrender. "Just know that the offer stands. I live just a few houses down." "Thanks," he muttered, watching as she walked away. He felt a mixture of gratitude and pride, yet also a nagging sense of isolation. Would he ever truly belong in this community again? That evening, as he put Lily to bed, Harold found himself staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. The weight of the day hung over him like a thick fog. He had faced judgment, yet he found a glimmer of acceptance. The kindness from Tom and the woman at the park made him wonder if he could build a new life for himself and Lily here. As he settled into the worn armchair beside her crib, Harold's mind drifted back to his own childhood. He had been a happy boy once, surrounded by family, laughter, and love. But that seemed like a lifetime ago, buried under the weight of regret and loneliness. "I want to be better for you, Lily," he whispered into the quiet room. "You deserve so much more than I've ever had." He closed his eyes, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. Images of his old life flickered in his mind, the holidays spent alone, the phone calls that never came, the empty chair at the dinner table. But now, as he listened to the soft breaths of the child who had unexpectedly changed his life, he felt a sense of purpose begin to blossom within him. The next day, as he prepared to head out with Lily again, Harold felt a surge of determination. He would not let the whispers and judgment define his journey. He would embrace this challenge, even if it scared him to his core. "Let's go show the world what we can do, huh?" he said, fastening the carrier around his chest. Lily babbled in response, her tiny fists waving in excitement. With a newfound resolve, Harold stepped into the sunlight, ready to face whatever came next. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew he would do everything in his power to protect this precious girl who had entered his life and filled it with a light he had long thought extinguished. Harold sat in his faded armchair, the fabric worn and frayed, but oddly comforting as he cradled Lily in his arms. The sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, casting a warm glow over the room, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. It was during these quiet moments that he found solace, even as memories of his past haunted him. He looked down at Lily, her tiny fingers grasping at the air, her bright blue eyes wide with curiosity. The innocence reflected in her gaze tugged at his heartstrings, reminding him of the life he once had, filled with laughter and the chaos of family. The doorbell chimed, snapping him from his reverie. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at Lily, who gurgled happily in response to the sound. With a deep breath, he set her down in her crib and shuffled to the door, the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet. As he swung the door open, he was met with the familiar sight of Karen, the social worker he had encountered before. She wore a professional yet approachable expression, her clipboard clutched tightly under her arm. "Good afternoon, Harold," she greeted, her voice smooth and steady. "May I come in?" "Of course," Harold replied, stepping aside to let her enter. He motioned toward the living room, where the remnants of his life surrounded him. Photos of his family, dusty books, and the old television that rarely flickered to life anymore. Karen took a seat, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Harold's face. "I wanted to check in and see how you and Lily are doing." Harold offered a weak smile, unsure of how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions he felt. "We're managing, I suppose. It's different. I've never taken care of a baby before." "Understandably so," Karen said, her tone encouraging. "It's a big transition, but it seems you're doing well. I've heard some good things around town about how you've been bonding with her." "Bonding?" Harold chuckled softly, the sound tinged with disbelief. "I'm just doing my best not to drop her." "Every little effort counts," Karen reassured him. "But I'd like to talk about something a bit more serious." She leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of concern. "I want to discuss your past, Harold. It's important for both you and Lily." With those words, Harold felt the walls around his heart begin to crack open. He had spent so long building those walls, hiding from the pain of his past and the estrangement from his family. Yet here was someone willing to listen. "What do you want to know?" "I understand you've been alone for quite some time. Can you tell me about your relationships, your family?" Karen inquired gently, her eyes searching his for understanding. Harold sighed, the weight of his memories pressing down on him. "I had a family once," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "A wife, 2 children. But life, it happened. My wife passed away, and the kids grew up, moved away. They have their own lives now. I don't think they even think about me." Karen nodded, her expression sympathetic. "That must be very difficult for you." "It is," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I often wonder if I did something wrong, if I pushed them away. I was never the best father. I worked long hours, and when I was home, I was more focused on my own problems than theirs. I guess it's no surprise they wanted to leave." "You were dealing with a lot," Karen reminded him softly, "but you're not alone anymore. You have Lily now." Harold looked down at the baby, who was now playing with a small stuffed animal, her laughter filling the room with a sweetness he had almost forgotten. "This little girl, she's given me a second chance, hasn't she?" he mused, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see so much of my own loneliness in her. She was left behind, just like I was." Karen leaned back in her chair, observing him closely. "You're starting to recognize the parallels in your lives. That's an important step, Harold." I don't want to fail her," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't want her to feel the way I do." "You're already doing better than you think," Karen encouraged. "You're here, you're caring for her, and you're trying to understand your own feelings. That's a good foundation." As they continued to talk, Harold felt the burden of his past slowly lifting. He shared anecdotes from his youth, his dreams of being a writer, and how he had let those dreams fade over the years. Karen listened intently, asking questions that prompted him to dig deeper into his memories. "I used to tell stories to my kids," he recalled, a smile creeping onto his face. "They loved it. I would weave tales of adventure, of dragons and brave heroes. I thought those stories were gone forever. But now I wonder if I could tell them to Lily." Karen's eyes sparkled with encouragement. "I think she would love that. Children thrive on stories. They help them make sense of the world." Harold felt a warmth spread through him at the thought. "I could try," he said almost to himself. "Maybe I could even write them down one day." As the conversation drifted, Harold found himself laughing, the sound foreign yet welcome. He felt a sense of purpose beginning to awaken within him, a flicker of hope in the depths of his loneliness. Later that evening, after Karen had left, Harold sat in the living room with Lily, who was now peacefully sleeping in her crib. He pulled out an old notebook from the shelf, its pages yellowed with age, and began to write. The words flowed from him like water, pouring out the stories he had suppressed for so long. Each line was a promise to Lily, a vow that she would never know the kind of neglect he had experienced. Just as he finished a particularly whimsical tale about a brave knight and a mischievous dragon, a gentle knock echoed through the quiet house. Harold's heart raced as he approached the door, an unease creeping in. He opened it cautiously, revealing an envelope lying on his doorstep. It was unmarked and weathered, as if it had traveled a long way to reach him. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant yet unsettling. As he read the words, his stomach twisted into knots. The letter spoke of a family secret and hinted at connections between Lily and his past that he had never anticipated. Who could have sent this? He murmured to himself, his mind racing with possibilities. As he stared at the letter, a wave of dread washed over him. It was a reminder that the past had not completely released its hold on him, and that the truth about Lily's origins might be more complicated than he had ever envisioned. He glanced back at Lily, asleep in her crib, her cherubic face devoid of worry. "What have I gotten us into?" he whispered, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him once more. In that moment, Harold knew he had to protect her, to uncover the mystery behind the letter and what it meant for their future. The journey ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in years, he felt an inkling of determination to confront the shadows of his past, not just for himself, but for Lily. As the morning sun pierced the heavy drapes of Harold's living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, he sat at the rickety table, the mysterious letter still crumpled in his hand. His heart raced as he recalled his conversation with Karen the previous day. Her evasive demeanor only heightened his anxiety. What was she hiding? He felt a protective instinct surge within him, a fierce desire to shield Lily from whatever darkness loomed in their lives. "Karen," he murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why won't you tell me what you know?" The unanswered questions gnawed at him, but he knew he couldn't simply sit idle. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Harold stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a screech that echoed in the silence of the house. He paced the small living room, the letter weighing heavily in his pocket. The words "family secret" echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. He glanced at Lily, who was nestled comfortably in her crib, her tiny fingers curling around the edges of the blanket. She stirred slightly, her soft coos breaking the tension that surrounded him. "Everything will be all right, little one," Harold spoke softly, leaning over her. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, a gesture that filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "I promise I'll find out the truth." With renewed determination, Harold decided to visit the local police department. Perhaps they had information that could shed light on the mysterious circumstances of Lily's abandonment. He grabbed his jacket and hesitated for a moment at the door, glancing back at the baby who had transformed his life in ways he had never anticipated. As he walked through the quiet streets of the town, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The townsfolk had been whispering since Lily's arrival, their curious glances filled with judgment and speculation. But today he felt a sense of purpose that drowned out the noise of their opinions. Upon entering the police station, Harold approached the desk sergeant, a stout man with a graying mustache. "Excuse me," Harold said, his voice firm despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "I'm looking for any information regarding a baby that was abandoned recently." The sergeant eyed him skeptically. "You mean the one found on your doorstep?" "Yes," Harold confirmed, his throat tightening. "I want to know more about her. Anything you can tell me." The sergeant leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Look, sir, it's an ongoing investigation. We can't just give out information like that." Frustration bubbled within Harold. "I understand, but I'm the one taking care of her. I need to know if she's safe, if there's any risk to her." "Please," the sergeant sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get it, I really do. But all I can tell you is that the case is being handled by a social worker, Karen. You might want to speak with her about it." Harold nodded, feeling a wave of defeat wash over him. "Thank you," he said, turning away from the desk. As he stepped back onto the street, a sense of hopelessness settled in his chest. He had come seeking answers, but had found nothing but more obstacles. Back at home, he found Lily awake, her big blue eyes watching him intently. A smile broke across her tiny face, and he couldn't help but return it. The innocence in her gaze reminded him of the wonder he had lost over the years. "Let's go for a walk, shall we?" he said, lifting her carefully from the crib. He wrapped her snugly in a blanket and stepped outside, the crisp air filling his lungs. As they strolled through the neighborhood, Harold began to notice the subtle changes in how the community interacted with him. The whispers had quieted, replaced by hesitant smiles and nods of acknowledgement. "Hey, Harold!" called out a neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a kind woman who had lived next door for as long as he could remember. "Is that little Lily? She's adorable." "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," he replied, pride swelling in his chest. "She's been a joy." "Good to see you out and about. You know, it takes a village to raise a child," she said, her tone warm and reassuring. "Indeed," he agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. Perhaps this community could help him navigate the challenges ahead. As the days passed, Harold grew accustomed to the rhythm of caring for Lily. He found solace in her laughter and delight in her curious explorations of the world around her. Yet the shadow of the letter loomed over him, a constant reminder that he needed to uncover the truth about her origins. One afternoon, as he was washing dishes, the doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet house. Startled, he wiped his hands on a towel and opened the door to find Karen standing on his porch, her expression grave. "Harold," she began, her voice low. "Can we talk?" "Of course. Please come in," he replied, stepping aside to let her enter. He led her to the living room, his heart racing as he anticipated another uncomfortable conversation. "Is this about the letter?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Karen hesitated, glancing at the floor before meeting his gaze. "Yes, I've been doing some digging, and there are things you need to know." "Then tell me." His voice rose slightly, desperation creeping in. "I can't protect her if I don't know what I'm up against." She took a breath, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "There are rumors circulating about the baby, Harold. Some say there's a connection to a family that's been involved in less than legal activities. I can't confirm anything, but it's been troubling me." Harold's heart sank. "What kind of activities?" "Nothing concrete," she said quickly, raising her hands as if to calm him. "But I have to advise you to be careful. If there's any truth to this, it might not be safe for you or Lily." The weight of her words pressed heavily on his chest. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Keep your eyes open," she replied, her tone serious. "And if you notice anything suspicious, don't hesitate to reach out to me." As Karen left, Harold felt an unsettling mix of fear and determination. He had to protect Lily, no matter the cost. That night, as he tucked her into bed, he promised her silently that he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. Weeks passed, and Harold became increasingly aware of the whispers that trailed him as he ventured out with Lily. He felt the weight of scrutiny, the judgment of a community that had once turned its back on him. But as he navigated this new reality, he also began to feel a sense of connection with the people around him, like they were all part of a larger story that intertwined their lives. One evening, as he attended a neighborhood gathering at the local park, he spotted a familiar face. Margaret, a woman from his street, approached him with a curious expression. "Harold, can we talk for a minute? I think I might know something about Lily." His heart raced at her words. "Really? What do you know?" he asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "Let's step over here," she suggested, leading him to a quieter corner away from the laughter and chatter of the gathering. "I saw something a few weeks back," she began, her voice low. "A car speeding away from the area where you found Lily. It was strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected somehow." Harold's pulse quickened as he listened intently. This could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. "Did you see the license plate? Anything else?" "No, it all happened too fast," she replied, frustration marking her features. "But I suspect it might be related to something bigger. There have been rumors about some shady dealings in the area, involving babies." The pieces began to fall into place for Harold, and he felt a surge of determination. "Thank you, Margaret. I need to know more." As they continued to talk, Harold felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. But within that burden, he also felt a flicker of hope. With each revelation, he drew closer to uncovering the truth about Lily's past, and perhaps his own redemption along the way. Harold stood in the dim light of his kitchen, a cup of lukewarm coffee clutched tightly in his hand. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, remnants of his earlier attempt at breakfast now long forgotten. His thoughts were consumed with the recent revelations about Lily's origins, particularly the unsettling conversation he had with Margaret the evening before. The weight of her words pressed down on him like a leaden blanket. "Harold, I saw a car speeding away the night they left her," Margaret had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was dark, but it looked suspicious. I think it might be connected to something much bigger, something dangerous. He could still see her anxious eyes darting around the room, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. There have been rumors about a trafficking ring operating in our town, she continued, her voice trembling. I've heard whispers. Missing children, all linked to that same car. Harold felt a chill run down his spine. The notion that Lily could be a part of such a grim reality was unbearable. The little girl, with her bright eyes and infectious laughter, was a beacon of hope in his otherwise desolate life. He thought about how she had changed him, filling the void left by years of loneliness. But now that very light felt threatened. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard a soft cooing sound from the living room. Lily was awake, her small form wriggling in her crib. Harold set down the coffee and hurried to her, his heart swelling as he laid eyes on her. She was the embodiment of innocence, her cheeks round and soft, her tiny fingers grasping at the air as if reaching for the world. Good morning, my little sunshine, he said, lifting her into his arms. She giggled, a sound like music to his ears, and he couldn't help but smile. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You know that? But even as he spoke, a knot of anxiety twisted in his stomach. He had to protect her. He couldn't let anything happen to her. She deserved a chance at life, a chance that had been denied to her before. Harold paced the room, rocking Lily gently. I promise I'll keep you safe, he murmured, his voice steadying as he made a silent vow. Later that day, Harold found himself seated across from Margaret at a small table in the corner of the local diner. The place was bustling, but he felt as if they were in a bubble, isolated from the noise surrounding them. Margaret looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she scanned the room nervously. Have you thought more about what I said? She asked, her voice low. I can't stop thinking about it, Harold admitted, leaning in closer. What do you know about this car? Do you have any idea who might have been driving it? She hesitated, biting her lip. I didn't get a good look at the driver, but I remember the make of the car. It was a dark sedan, maybe a Chrysler or a Honda. It sped off like it was in a hurry, and I swear I saw something in the back seat. Something that looked like a blanket. Her eyes filled with concern. I can't help but feel that it might have been Lily. A shiver crept down Harold's spine. What do we do then? He asked, his voice a mix of fear and determination. We can't just sit here and wait for someone to come after her. Margaret nodded, her brows furrowed in thought. We have to dig deeper. There have been reports about missing children in the area, and if there's a connection, we need to find it before it's too late. As they spoke, Harold felt a surge of adrenaline. He had to act for Lily's sake. Let's start by talking to the local police. Maybe they have leads or records we can look into, he suggested. Are you sure that's wise? Margaret asked, concern etched on her face. What if they're involved in this? What if they're covering it up? Harold bit back a retort, but her words lingered in the air. He had never been one to distrust the authorities, yet the thought of corruption gnawed at him. We need to take that risk, he finally said. I can't sit back and do nothing. After their meeting, Harold returned home with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. The shadows of doubt still loomed over him, but the thought of Lily being in danger fueled him. He found himself pacing the living room, glancing over at the crib where she slept peacefully. Her innocence was a stark contrast to the darkness swirling in his mind. That night, as Harold prepared for bed, he noticed an envelope slipped under the door. His heart raced as he knelt to pick it up, his fingers trembling slightly. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the message inside was brief yet chilling. Leave the baby alone or face the consequences. Fear surged through him, mixing with anger. Who had sent this? And what did they want? He crumpled the note in his fist, feeling an overwhelming need to protect Lily from whatever threat loomed over her. He spent the night pacing the floors, unable to sleep, haunted by the warning. Every creak of the house sent his nerves on edge, and he found himself constantly peeking out the window, half expecting to see shadows lurking in the darkness. As dawn broke, Harold knew he had to act. He couldn't let this warning intimidate him into inaction. Gathering his courage, he picked up the phone and called Margaret. Margaret, we need to meet. Something's happened, and I don't think we can trust anyone, he said, urgency in his voice. Okay, I'll be there. Just be careful, Harold, she replied, concern lacing her tone. After hanging up, Harold felt a wave of determination wash over him. He had to protect Lily, not just from the unknown threats, but from the painful echoes of his own past. He had spent too long hiding from the world, and now, with Lily in his life, he wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. As he prepared to leave, he glanced at Lily one last time. "I'll be back, sweetheart," he whispered, kissing her forehead gently. "I promise. Nobody's going to take you away from me." With that, he stepped out into the cool morning air, ready to confront whatever awaited him. Harold stood in his cramped living room, the dim light casting elongated shadows across the walls. He felt a heavy weight in his chest, the kind that had settled there during the years of his loneliness. The recent threats had only intensified his anxiety, and he found himself pacing back and forth, trying to gather his thoughts. Lily, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding her, cooed softly in her crib, her tiny hands reaching for imaginary clouds. As he moved to the kitchen, Harold began to gather supplies. A few diapers, a couple of bottles filled with formula, and some of the baby clothes that had been gifted to him by well-meaning neighbors. He paused, holding a small onesie decorated with cartoon animals. It was a stark reminder of the innocence he was trying so hard to protect, yet it felt like a fragile barrier against the darkness lurking just outside his door. Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the house, jolting Harold out of his thoughts. His heart raced as he glanced at Lily, who had stopped cooing and was now staring wide-eyed at the door. He dropped the onesie and approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Karen, the social worker, who had been checking in on him, but her expression was different this time. There was a distressing urgency in her eyes. Opening the door slowly, Harold felt a surge of protective instinct wash over him. "Karen," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "what are you doing here?" "Harold," she gasped, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk. It's urgent." He closed the door behind her, the sound echoing in the silence of the house. "What's wrong?" he asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "Is it about Lily? Are we—" "Not about Lily, not yet," she interrupted, her brow furrowed. "It's about the investigation. It's taken a dark turn. I need you to listen carefully." Harold felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Dark turns were never good. "What do you mean?" Karen took a deep breath, glancing toward the crib where Lily was now playing with a small stuffed animal. "There's someone involved in this case, a person from my past, someone I thought I had left behind. They might be connected to Lily's abandonment." "Connected?" Harold echoed, his mind racing. "How?" She reached into her bag, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out a photograph. "This," she said, handing it to him. "I need you to look at it." Harold took the picture, his fingers brushing against the glossy surface. He unfolded it, revealing a woman with striking features, her hair cascading in dark waves. There was an unmistakable resemblance between the woman and Lily. His breath caught in his throat as he absorbed the reality of what he was seeing. "This is your daughter," Karen whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. The words struck Harold like a thunderbolt. "My daughter?" he repeated, disbelief swirling in his mind. This can't be right." "I know it sounds impossible," Karen said, her voice urgent. "But the woman in that picture, she was involved in a lot of dangerous activities. She disappeared years ago, and I think she might have resurfaced. If she's connected to Lily, then we're both in danger." "Danger?" Harold's voice was a mixture of fear and confusion as he looked down at the photograph again. "But how? I don't even know who she is." "She's been linked to a number of missing children in this area," Karen replied, her eyes pleading with him to understand the gravity of the situation. "If she's Lily's mother, then there are people who will stop at nothing to find her." Harold's mind raced, grappling with the implications. He felt a torrent of emotions surge within him: fear for Lily, anger at the situation, and an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice low and shaky. "We need to keep Lily safe," Karen said firmly. "We can't let anyone know where you are for now. I'll help you figure out what to do next." He nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "But what if she's not safe here? What if they come for her?" Karen stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with intensity. "That's why we need to act quickly. I can arrange for you to stay somewhere discreet, until we get to the bottom of this. But you have to trust me. Trust. It was a fragile thing for Harold, a man who had been abandoned by his own family and left to fend for himself. But looking at Lily, who was now reaching out towards him with her tiny fingers, he felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steadier. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." "Good," Karen replied, relief washing over her features. "I'll make the arrangements. But for now, we need to lay low. Keep everything quiet until we know more." As they spoke, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Harold glanced at the photograph once more, absorbing the face of the woman who might hold the key to Lily's past. If she was indeed connected to him, then the answers he sought were closer than he had imagined. Lily let out a soft gurgle, her innocence a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Harold knelt beside her crib, his heart swelling with a mix of love and fear. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised her, brushing a gentle hand across her forehead. Karen watched him, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're already a better father than you realize, Harold. You're doing everything you can to protect her, and that counts for something." He met her gaze, gratitude flooding through him. "I just wish I knew more. I need to understand what's happening." "Soon," she replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But for now, let's focus on keeping you both safe. We'll figure this out together." As the sun began to set outside, casting golden rays through the window, Harold felt a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty. He had been given a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite his story alongside Lily. Whatever lay ahead, he vowed to face it head-on, determined to uncover the truth and protect the little girl who had brought meaning back into his life.